Picture this, you've just won your 68th consecutive battle at the Battle Tower. You're one win away from being able to face off against Annabelle to complete the Gold Challenge. You walk into the next battle room and await your opponent. Out walks Birdkeeper Harold and your confidence peaks. What's the worst he could have? An Altaria? I can beat that. The battle starts. You're already planning for Annabelle's team. All of a sudden, Birdkeeper Harold sends out Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres. What the fuck? If you've spent many hours in the Battle Frontier, you've probably had moments like this. A stretch of wins that fills you with confidence, only for that to be dashed by a guitarist with triple legendaries. In this video, I'm going to explain how Battle Frontier trainers actually work in Pokemon Emerald, from how their teams are chosen to their battle styles. Let's start with some general information on how the Battle Frontier trainers work. There is a set list of 300 trainers that will appear in all 7 of the battle facilities. These trainers each have unique names and belong to the trainer classes that we're all familiar with. Youngsters and swimmers, all the way up to dragon tamers and experts. As you'd expect, trainers in the same class use similar types of Pokemon that match the theme of the trainer class. So swimmers use a lot of water types, Aroma ladies use a lot of grass types, you get the picture. The 300 trainers can then be broken down a few different ways. First, let's talk about when you can encounter them. Battle Frontier trainers are assigned to difficulty groups, which are based on the amount of consecutive battles you've won. For most battle facilities, you complete challenges in rounds, and each round is made up of 7 battles. There are 8 total difficulty groups, and these groups are split for every 7th consecutive win you have. So we can simply say that each group will match the round you're currently on in any given challenge. Once you reach 50 consecutive battles, or round 8, Group 8 trainers will appear and be the same group of trainers you face from then onwards. In other words, it doesn't reset back to Group 1. There are obviously more than just 7 trainers in each group, and trainers are selected at random for each battle in a round, so you won't necessarily see every trainer over the course of a challenge. Just to give you a sense of the potential variety, 80 of the 300 trainers are in Group 1 alone, and could appear in round 1 of any challenge. Trainers can also appear in 1 or more difficulty groups, meaning you could face them in round 3 and round 4. As you would expect, the later a trainer appears in your challenge, the stronger Pokemon they'll have. Let's use some Pokefan trainers as an example. Pokefans Peyton, Julian, and Quinn can all appear in round 1, and use mostly basic Pokemon, like first form starters and weakest single stage Pokemon, like Spinder and Mawile. And then you have Pokefans Todd, Gavin, Mallory, and Esther, who can appear during round 7 and from round 8 onwards. The teams will have final form Pokemon like Gardevoir and Ludicolo, as well as stronger single stage Pokemon like Absol and Snorlax. You get the picture. Before I go into detail on how Pokemon are selected for the trainers' teams, I just want to briefly touch on how their Pokemon's IVs work, because that's tied to the group number that they appear in as well. While a Pokemon on a Battle Frontier trainers team will have uniform IVs across all its stats, the total number of IVs a Pokemon has increases in each difficulty group. Each trainer's Pokemon in Group 1 or Round 1 will have 3 IVs, Round 2 has 6 total IVs, and this increases until Round 8, where they max out with 31 IVs. For trainers that appear in multiple rounds, their Pokemon will have IVs that correspond to the first round they appear in. As an example, Pokefan Peyton from before can first appear in round 7, so his Pokemon will all have 21 IVs, even if he appears in round 8 or any round beyond that. So now we know how Battle Frontier trainers work, but how about their Pokemon? Just like the trainers, there is a set list of Pokemon available, and this list features pretty much every Pokemon from the Gen 3 National Dex. The only Pokemon missing are the restricted ones that you, the player, are not allowed to bring on a Battle Frontier challenge. But Pokemon don't just get generated onto a trainer's team with random moves and stats. The list of Pokemon is made up of specific builds of a Pokemon with set moves, stats, and items. There are 883 total builds, and each Pokemon species can have multiple builds, with each build having slightly different moves, items, and stat spreads. So let me show you what I mean. Here are 5 different Snorlax builds that could be generated on an NPC trainer's team. You can see that they're all pretty similar with some minor variations. They all have adamant natures, but these 2 builds here are geared for physical attacking with max EVs in attack and defense and hard-hitting moves. But even within these builds, one has a Quick Claw and Mega Kick, while the other has Leftovers and Earthquake. Meanwhile, the other 3 builds are geared more towards survivability, having an even EV spread across HP, defense, and special defense. And within these defensive builds, one is clearly set up to sweep with Belly Drum, Rest, and a Chesto Berry, while one looks more like a stall build with Curse, Rest, and a Chesto Berry. So the nature and stats of the Pokemon are set for each build, and I've talked about how IVs are calculated. But what about abilities? Well, they get chosen at random. If a Pokemon only has one ability, then it will just have that ability. But if Pokemon has 2 abilities, there will be a 50-50 chance as to which ability it has when it appears on a trainer's team. Just like the trainers, the list of Pokemon is split into groups based on difficulty, or in this case, how strong the Pokemon are. There are 4 groups in total: Ungrouped, Group 1, Group 2, and Group 3. I'll have more to say about the ungrouped Pokemon later, but just know that the higher a group number is, the stronger the Pokemon are within it. Pokemon in the ungrouped category are typically baby Pokemon, first form Pokemon, and weak single stage Pokemon. Group 1 Pokemon are a slight step above that, featuring a mix of first form and middle stage evolutions, as well as the final forms of weak early game Pokemon like Ariados and Beautifly. Group 2 steps things up again with more middle stage evolutions, stronger single form Pokemon, and the final evolutions of mid game Pokemon like Sharpedo and Camerupt. Group 3 is the biggest group of them all and features final evolutions, strong single form Pokemon, pseudo-legendaries, and non-restricted legendary Pokemon like the Regis, the Kanto Birds, and Latias and Latios. So how do Pokemon actually get chosen for a trainer's team? Each trainer actually has a set list of around 20 to 30 Pokemon builds that they can pull from. Like I mentioned earlier, each trainer class has a general theme of Pokemon they use, and the stronger trainers will use Pokemon builds from the stronger groups. And it gets more specific than that. Trainers from the same class who are in the same difficulty group actually pull from the same list of Pokemon builds. Let's go back to the Pokefans I used as an example earlier. As I said before, Pokefans Peyton, Julian, and Quinn can all appear in round 1, and they will use any combination of Pokemon from this list of builds here. This is comprised of Pokemon from the ungrouped category and Group 1, and as you can see, they use Pokemon with stats and moves that make sense for the beginning of a battle facility challenge. Next, look at the list of Pokemon that Pokefans Todd, Gavin, Mallory, and Esther use. These Pokemon are all Group 3 Pokemon with builds that match the fact that these trainers can appear from round 7 onwards. So, we figured out the answer to the question from the start of the video. How is it the Birdkeeper Harold can use the legendary birds? Well, Harold is a Birdkeeper, meaning his team will be made up of flying type Pokemon. He can appear from round 8 onwards, meaning those flying types will be selected from amongst the Group 3 Pokemon. And Moltres, Zapdos, and Articuno are a part of that group. It actually sucks if that was you. You could just as easily have faced youngster Jackson on his 69th battle. The strongest Pokemon he can pull is Alakazam, which is strong, don't get me wrong, but he could also just as easily have pulled a Misdreavus. Next, I want to talk about how each battle facility has an impact on the trainers and their Pokemon selection. I'm not going to go in depth on how the AI works in the Battle Frontier, that's really a separate topic on its own, but I do want to talk about how each facility's rules impact a trainer's battle style. I'll quickly cover off the battle tower because it's super simple. You compete in rounds made up of 7 battles against NPC trainers. Your consecutive battle streak carries over between rounds, so as you win more battles in the battle tower, you'll face tougher opponents with stronger Pokemon based on all the mechanics I just explained. The only special thing to note is that your final battle of each round will be against a trainer that comes from the difficulty group of the next round. So your final battle of round 4 will be against a trainer from Group 5. The exception is if you're on a win streak of 50 or more, and in that case there's no next difficulty group. So any of the trainers in that final group can appear in the last battle of a round. Easy, right? I should quickly mention that the Battle Tower did exist in Ruby and Sapphire, and was the only battle facility in those games. It functions pretty much the same way as it does in Emerald. Trainers appear and grow in difficulty based on how many rounds you've completed, and a stronger trainer from the next difficulty group will appear as the final opponent in each round. But Ruby and Sapphire's Battle Tower uses a simplified list of trainers and Pokemon. There are only 100 trainers in total and 2 groups of Pokemon. One group for the level 50 challenge and another group for the level 100 challenge. The Pokemon still have specific builds, and there are still multiple builds for each Pokemon, but the list only includes Pokemon who appear in the Hoenn regional decks, not the national decks. Moving on, and one facility that might seem complicated, but is actually really simple when it comes to the enemy trainers, is the Battle Pike. At the Battle Pike, you take on a challenge where you must make it through 7 rooms to complete a round. Each room has one of 8 events that occur, and each event has an even chance of occurring. These events are a single battle, a double battle, a hard single battle with healing, wild Pokemon, no event, a status condition, 1 or 2 Pokemon healed, and lastly, all Pokemon healed. Before each room, you're given a choice of 3 doors to enter, and each one comes with a hint that tells you which effect will happen in that room. The premise of the Battle Pike Challenge is to navigate your way through these rooms, making choices of which room to enter based on the hints, while managing your Pokemon's health to hopefully reach the end. The Battle Pike's actually my favourite battle facility, but I'm only going to focus on the battle rooms for this video because they're the ones that are relevant to the trainers. And like with the Battle Tower, it's pretty simple. Anytime you wind up in a battle room in a particular round, you'll fight a trainer or trainers in a double battle room that correspond to the difficulty group for that round. So in your 3rd round of the Battle Pike, you'll fight trainers from Group 3. And even though rounds would normally match up to your number of consecutive battles, In the battle pike, each room essentially counts as a consecutive battle, even if it's not a battle room, since there's 7 rooms to a round. The exception is the strong trainers with healing, who work the same way as the final trainer in a round at the battle tower. These trainers will be from the next round's difficulty group. The difference here is these strong trainers could be in any of the rooms, not just the last room. They could very well derail your run early, but because they heal your entire team if you beat them, they could save your run. Another simple facility is the battle pyramid. Here, you make your way through the 7 floors of the pyramid to complete one round. Like Brawly's gym, each floor is covered in darkness and lights up more with each trainer that you defeat. Defeated trainers can give you hints about the floor you're currently on, like where the exit is and how many trainers you haven't defeated. Again, the trainers here follow the same rules we've talked about. Each round of the battle pyramid will feature trainers from that difficulty group across each of the 7 floors, and each round increases in difficulty as normal. The curveball that the battle pyramid throws at you is that you can actually encounter wild Pokemon during the challenge. These wild Pokemon are split into 20 themed groups that each use a particular tactic. The current round you're on will correspond to the group of wild Pokemon that appear. So Group 1 Pokemon appear in round 1, Group 2 in round 2, Group 3 in round 3, and so on. You face Group 20 Pokemon in round 20, and then in round 21, it resets back to Group 1, and then follows the same pattern again. Pokemon in the lower numbered groups typically have lower base stat totals, and those in the higher groups are typically all fully evolved with higher base stats. In terms of the tactics the groups use, well, half of them are just that the group is made up of a certain type of Pokemon, like all bug or all water types. Some of them are a bit more interesting though. A handful of the groups specialize in status conditions, while some groups have specific abilities, like Group 5 all being Pokemon with Levitate, or Group 6 having Pokemon with Arena Trap. So the wild Pokemon just provide another layer of complexity that you have to think about when taking the Battle Pyramid challenge. Next up is the Battle Arena, and like the Battle Pike, the trainer selection is actually pretty simple, but the challenge itself might make things a bit confusing. To put it simply, you and your opponent each bring 3 Pokemon into a battle in front of a judge. Each battle is then broken down into one-on-one fights that last 3 turns each. If you KO the opposing Pokemon before the 3 turns, your current Pokemon then faces off against the next Pokemon in your opponent's party. If you KO all 3 enemy Pokemon, then congratulations, you move on to the next battle. If the opposite happens, then obviously you lose. If you don't KO an opposing Pokemon, or they don't KO your Pokemon before the 3 turns are up, the judge will give each Pokemon a score based on 3 categories. Mind, which is how many attacking moves the Pokemon used, skill, which is how accurate the moves were, and body, which is how much HP the Pokemon has remaining at the end of the 3rd turn. The winner in each category gets 2 points, and the Pokemon with the most points wins and stays in the fight. The judge automatically KOs the loser, and whoever lost sends out their next Pokemon, and the 3-turn timer begins again. So there's actually quite a lot of depth to the battles, but like normal, every 7 battles in the battle arena completes 1 round, and the trainers get stronger with each round as you progress through. From what I understand, the opposing trainer's AI isn't modified to take the scoring system into account, so I don't think their battle style changes at all to try and score more points. They fight just like any other trainer. Sometimes this means they'll disadvantage themselves by using moves that don't score points. I'm not 100% certain on this, so if you have any information on how the battle arena trainers fight, feel free to leave a comment below. One facility where a trainer's battle style is important is the Battle Dome. At the Battle Dome, you compete in a 16 trainer bracket style tournament where you need to win 4 battles to complete a round. This is the only facility where each round is made up of 4 battles instead of 7, but the trainers in each round will still be from the corresponding difficulty group to that round. So normally trainers in difficulty group 2 would appear in round 2 after 7 consecutive battles in every other facility. But here they appear in round 2, which you reach after 4 consecutive battles. Before each battle in the Battle Dome, you're shown your opponent's trainer card, which lists their trainer class and name, the Pokemon in their party, and 3 pieces of descriptive information. One piece of information is just about how highly seeded they are in the tournament bracket, but the other 2 pieces of information give you an insight into their team. The second piece of information gives you a description of their battle style based on the moves their Pokemon knows. In the Battle Dome, moves are split into 17 categories based on their properties. For example, moves like Explosion are in the risky category, while Hyper Beam is in the powerful category. The game has a list of 28 descriptive battle styles and will assign one to a trainer which best fits the moves their Pokemon has. So a trainer would be described as skilled at enfeebling foes, if between all three of their Pokemon they had at least one move from the stat lowering category and at least one move from the status category. The third piece of information on the trainer card is related to the EVs that their Pokemon has. The game will tell you a trainer emphasizes a certain stat if it makes up 30% or more of the team's total EV pool. Or it will tell you that a trainer neglects a certain stat when that stat makes up less than 1% of the total EV pool and there's no clear emphasized stat. Otherwise, you'll be told the trainer has well-balanced Pokemon if their stats are well balanced. There's one thing I haven't mentioned yet that also has an impact on your opponent's Pokemon choice in the Battle Dome. When you begin a round at the Battle Dome, you bring a team of 3 Pokemon, but for each battle, you pre-select 2 of your 3 Pokemon before you face the next trainer, and then you battle with teams of 2. You get to pick your 2 Pokemon after you have the chance to look at your opponent's team of 3, so you get the opportunity to pick Pokemon that you think will match up well in the battle. But how does your opponent pick their Pokemon? To put it simply, each of your opponent's 3 Pokemon gets given a score, and the 2 Pokemon with the highest score are chosen for the battle. The game can score the Pokemon based on 2 different methods, an offensive method and a defensive method. The method chosen each time is random, but they operate on the same principle. Basically, the opposing trainer will look at each of their Pokemon's attacking moves and how well they match up against the typings of your 3 Pokemon. Points are then assigned to each move based on how effective it is against each of your Pokemon. In the offensive method, points are added for moves that are super effective and deducted for moves that are not very effective. The opposite happens in the defensive method. Points are added for moves that resist your Pokemon's typings and deducted for moves that are super effective. The points for each move are added together to give each Pokemon their final score. If there are any ties, the game uses the opposite method it originally chose to get new scores. And if there are still ties after all of that, the Pokemon are just picked at random. You're probably thinking, hang on, the defensive method sounds completely useless. And you're 100% right. The defensive method is picking Pokemon for your opponent that have the most not very effective moves against your team. I can see what they might have been trying to do. A proper defensive method would look at your moves and score the opponent's Pokemon higher based on how well they resist your moves. But then that implies that your opponent knows what moves your Pokemon has, which is pretty unfair. Maybe a better way to implement the defensive method would just be to score your opponent's Pokemon higher based on how well their typings resist the typings of your Pokemon in general. But either way, that's how opposing trainers work in the Battle Dome. Next up is the Battle Palace. This is a facility where Pokemon battle on their own and their move choice is determined by their nature. The trainer encounters in the Battle Palace operate as normal. Each round is again 7 battles, and trainers will increase in difficulty groups as you progress through the rounds. But obviously the fact that Pokemon choose their own moves based on their natures has a pretty significant impact on a trainer's battle style. So how does it work? In the Battle Palace, moves are grouped into 3 categories: attack, defense, and support. They're pretty self-explanatory, but if you're unsure about the difference between defensive moves and support moves, it's that defensive moves are non-damaging moves that target the user, and support moves are non-damaging moves that target the opponent. So Bulk Up is a defensive move, while Swagger is a support move. Each nature then has a ratio of how likely it is to choose a move from each category. This ratio also changes whenever a Pokemon's HP falls below 50%. I won't go over all of them, but to give you an example, Pokemon with an adamant nature have a fairly balanced ratio between the 3 types of moves. A 38% chance for attacking moves, and a 31% chance each for defensive and supporting moves. But when an adamant nature Pokemon's HP drops below 50%, it changes to a 70% chance to use attacking moves and a 15% chance each for defense and support moves. There is another modifier to this in double battles. A Pokemon's nature will affect which Pokemon it targets, and this is split pretty evenly. Some natures will attack the opposing Pokemon that has more HP, while some natures will target the opposing Pokemon with less HP. There's obviously a lot of strategy involved on your end to build a team of Pokemon with natures that will use the moves that you want them to use. But you can see how your opponent's teams being made up of specific Pokemon builds with set moves and natures is so important here. Because it has a big impact on your opponent's battle style, you can use the knowledge of each specific build to work out what moves their Pokemon are likely to use. It's not going to give you super easy wins or anything, but it definitely gives you the upper hand. The final facility to talk about is the Battle Factory, and this one is cooked. As normal, rounds in the Battle Factory are made up of 7 battles each, but here, you use rental Pokemon instead of your own. At the start of each round, you choose 3 Pokemon from a starting selection of 6 rental Pokemon, and after each victory, you have the option to swap one of your Pokemon with one of your opponents. So I said the Battle Factory was cooked, and this is because it takes everything that we've learned about the NPC trainers, how their Pokemon work, their stats, and says, lol, JK. The first thing to cover off is the fact that all the rental Pokemon that are available to you come from the same list of Pokemon that the enemy trainers pull from for their Pokemon. The selection of Pokemon available to you depends on what round of the challenge you're up to. For the level 50 format, in round 1, you select from group 1, in rounds 2 and 3, you choose from group 2 Pokemon, and from round 4 onwards, you get Pokemon from group 3. There are some exceptions though. Unknown, who is a group 1 Pokemon, will never appear in the Battle Factory, either for you to rent or on another trainer's team. On top of that, legendary Pokemon, who are in group 3, won't appear before round 8. Your opponents will also use Pokemon from the groups that match the round number, the same as you do. The open level format is a lot simpler. From round 1, your rental Pokemon and your opponent's Pokemon will all be pulled from group 3, with legendary Pokemon only appearing from round 5 onwards. There is an extra layer to this that has to do with which specific builds of each Pokemon are chosen. I don't want to get stuck in the weeds too much, but just know that in the earlier rounds of the challenge, the weaker build for any particular Pokemon will be used, and then after round 8 in the level 50 format and round 5 in open level, any build of any Pokemon could be selected. I said earlier that I would have more to say about ungrouped Pokemon. Well, just like Unknown, ungrouped Pokemon do not appear at all in the Battle Factory. I think this is probably because they're too weak and in general have pretty limited movesets to be all that fun. Imagine having to do 7 battles in a row where you have a Caterpie that only knows Tackle and String Shot, and your opponents have a Magikarp that only knows Flail. No thanks. Another rule that impacts your opponent's Pokemon selection in the Battle Factory is the species clause. The game will not give your opponent a Pokemon of the same species to one that you already have on your team. This is to prevent you from being able to trade another one of your Pokemon after the battle to end up with 2 Pokemon of the same species. All the facilities in the Battle Frontier restrict you to 1 of each species of Pokemon, but since you use rental Pokemon in the Battle Factory and it has the trading mechanic, the game takes measures to prevent you from doubling up. That was already a lot of information about Pokemon selection at the Battle Factory, but there's still 2 more things I want to cover. Number 1 is the enemy trainer's battle style. There's another mechanic in the Battle Factory that occurs before you start each battle. The facility's attendant will give you some information about your upcoming opponent by telling you if they prefer to use a certain type of Pokemon and what battle style they use. Pokemon preference is self-explanatory. If your opponent is using a majority of one type, like water types, the attendant will say so. And if they have a balanced team, he'll tell you that they have no preference. But battle style is more in depth. Like the other facilities, moves in the Battle Factory are split into 7 categories. Not every move your opponent can have is on this list, but what the attendant does is look at your opponent's Pokemon, and if they have enough moves in a certain category, the attendant will describe them with the battle style that relates to that category. The number of moves needed in a category to trigger the description is 2 or 3 depending on the category, and 7 of the 9 descriptions match up to each of the 7 move categories. The other 2 battle style descriptions are just for if your opponent doesn't have enough moves in any one category to trigger a description, or if they have enough moves to trigger multiple battle styles. Finally, for the Battle Factory, I want to talk about how IVs are calculated. Like normal, the IVs an opponent's Pokemon has will correspond to their difficulty group and the round they can first appear in. Also, like some of the other facilities, the final trainer you face in a round will be stronger. But since Pokemon selection works a bit differently in the Battle Factory, these strong trainers will just have Pokemon with IVs that match the next difficulty group up. But the funny thing about all of that is that there's a programming error that changes everything. For the rental Pokemon you can choose from, they do follow the rule of having IVs that correspond to the round you're currently on. But for opposing trainers, instead of using your round number in the Battle Factory, their IVs are calculated based on your current win streak from the Battle Tower. So if you have a streak in the Battle Tower where you're up to round 7 and you go and challenge the Battle Factory for the first time, your Pokemon will have 3 IVs, while your opponents will have 31 from the get-go. You can of course use this to your advantage. If you reset to round 1 at the Battle Tower, your opponents in the Battle Factory will always have the minimum 3 IVs, no matter what round you progress to. But then if you swap any of your Pokemon for your opponents, you'll be swapping in a Pokemon with only 3 IVs, so keep that in mind. But wait, there's more. because of course the Battle Factory isn't complicated enough. There is another mechanic where the more times you rent or swap Pokemon, the game will actually generate stronger Pokemon for you to choose from the next time you're selecting your initial rental Pokemon. Stronger in this case means the Pokemon will have the IVs and movesets that it would normally have in the following round. This mechanic doesn't kick in until you've made 15 rentals and or swaps, where it will offer you one stronger Pokemon to choose from. And it caps out after 43 rents and or swaps, where you'll get 5 stronger Pokemon offered. This is a pretty helpful mechanic, but it does essentially require you to make a trade after every single battle to be able to get the most out of it from the get-go, which might mean that you end up forcing trades for Pokemon that are worse than the ones that you currently have. And that's it. That's your guide to how trainers work in the Battle Frontier in Pokemon Emerald. I'm going to do a follow-up video on how trainers work in the Gen 4 Battle Frontier, and when that's live, you'll be able to find that video here. But if you're curious about how some of the other battle facilities in the franchise work, like the Battle Tree in Alola or the Battle Maison in Kalos, leave a comment and I might do a deep dive on them too. For now, thanks for watching.